Shalom, my friends. Right now, as you're watching this video, millions of Americans are lying awake at night, their hearts racing with anxiety about money. The bills keep piling up, the credit card debt seems endless, and every time they check their bank account, that knot in their stomach gets tighter. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you felt that paralyzing fear when you realize you're living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from financial disaster. But what if I told you that this exact struggle, this overwhelming fear about money, was already addressed over 3,000 years ago in the Torah, and the solution isn't what you think? You see, here in America, we've been taught that financial success comes from working harder, getting more education, or finding the perfect investment strategy. We consume endless content about budgeting apps, side hustles, and cryptocurrency, yet the anxiety never goes away. The fear remains, and there's a reason for that. We're treating the symptoms, not the disease. The Torah teaches us something radically different, that our financial struggles aren't primarily about money at all. They're about something much deeper, something that modern financial advisors rarely address. And when you understand this ancient wisdom, everything changes. The Hebrew word for fear is yira, but it has two meanings that most people don't know about. There's the destructive fear, the panic, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, and then there's the constructive fear, which the sages call yirat shamayim, the awe that leads to wisdom. The Torah reveals that your relationship with money is actually a mirror reflecting your relationship with responsibility, with purpose, with the divine order that governs prosperity. And when you learn to transform destructive fear into constructive reverence, you don't just change your bank account, you change your entire life trajectory. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you 5 profound principles from the Torah that have helped countless people move from financial chaos to financial peace, from paralyzing fear to empowered responsibility. These aren't religious platitudes or feel-good mantras. These are practical, ancient strategies that work in modern America, whether you're drowning in student loans, struggling with mortgage payments, or simply can't seem to break the cycle of financial stress. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the wealthiest and most successful communities throughout history have always turned to these timeless teachings. So stay with me, because what you're about to learn could be the missing piece you've been searching for. The Torah opens with a profound declaration. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But the Hebrew word for created, which is bara, doesn't just mean to make something from nothing. It means to establish order from chaos. And this is exactly what's happening in your financial life right now. When you're overwhelmed by debt, when you're afraid to open your bills, when you're constantly stressed about money, what you're actually experiencing is chaos. The Torah teaches that money itself is neutral. It's neither good nor evil, but it's a tool that reveals whether you're operating in divine order or in chaos. Most Americans today are living in financial chaos not because they don't earn enough, but because they've never been taught how to establish order according to eternal principles. In Deuteronomy 8:18, the Torah tells us, "Remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth." Notice the emphasis here, not the wealth itself, but the ability to produce it. This is revolutionary because American culture has convinced us that wealth is something external we need to chase, acquire, or deserve. We've created an entire economy based on consumption, credit, and instant gratification, which directly contradicts Torah wisdom. The ancient teaching reveals that true financial security doesn't come from how much you have, but from understanding the divine system of how wealth is created and sustained. When you're living in fear about money, it's because you've disconnected from this system. You're trying to create order using chaos-based methods, and it never works. The sages explain that financial fear is actually a spiritual problem manifesting as a material crisis. When you don't understand your role in the divine economy, when you don't see yourself as a steward of resources rather than just a consumer, you'll always be afraid. Here in the United States, we see this played out every day. People with six-figure incomes who are still broke, families earning $100,000 a year who have nothing saved, and an entire generation buried under debt they can't escape. The Torah's solution isn't to make more money, it's to transform your understanding of what money represents. Money is energy. It's a tool for fulfilling your divine purpose. And when you start seeing it through this lens, not as something to fear or worship, but as a responsibility to steward wisely, everything shifts. The fear begins to dissolve because you're no longer operating from scarcity. You're operating from abundance consciousness rooted in eternal truth. The story of the Exodus isn't just ancient history, it's a blueprint for financial liberation that's directly applicable to Americans trapped in the slavery of debt today. When the Israelites were in Egypt, they were slaves, working endlessly, but never getting ahead, building someone else's empire while their own lives remained in bondage. Sound familiar? Today, millions of Americans are slaves to credit card companies, to student loan servicers, to mortgages they can barely afford, working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, yet never experiencing true freedom. The Torah reveals that the Exodus wasn't primarily about geographical relocation. It was about psychological, spiritual, and economic transformation. It was about moving from a slave mentality to a free person mentality, and that's exactly what needs to happen in your relationship with money. In Exodus 3:8, God promises to bring the people to a land flowing with milk and honey, not a land where they would continue to struggle and scrape by, but a land of abundance. But here's the key that most people miss. The abundance wasn't automatic. Between the promise and the fulfillment was the wilderness, a period of testing and transformation where the people had to learn new ways of thinking, new disciplines, new trust in divine provision. This is your journey right now. If you're struggling financially, you're in the wilderness between slavery and freedom. The Torah teaches that the wilderness isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's where you learn the principles that will sustain you in the promised land. But most Americans never make it out of the wilderness because they keep trying to apply Egyptian, slave thinking to freedom problems. The Torah gives us specific instructions for this transformation, and one of the most powerful is the principle of manna from Exodus 16. Every day the people received exactly what they needed, no more, no less, and they were forbidden from hoarding it. Those who tried to stockpile out of fear found that it rotted and bred worms. This ancient lesson destroys the modern American addiction to hoarding wealth out of fear while simultaneously living paycheck to paycheck. The Torah teaches a middle path. Trust in daily provision, develop consistent habits of receiving and giving, and break free from the anxiety that comes from either scarcity thinking or greed. When you apply the manna principle to your modern finances, creating systems of consistent income and consistent generosity, living within your means while trusting in tomorrow's provision, you break the cycle of financial slavery. You stop being controlled by fear and start being guided by faith in a system that has sustained people for thousands of years. One of the most counterintuitive yet powerful financial principles in the Torah is the law of first fruits, found in Exodus 23:19. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. In ancient agricultural society, this meant that before you fed your family, before you paid your workers, before you did anything else with your harvest, you gave the first and best portion to God. To the modern American mind, this sounds insane. We've been taught to pay ourselves last. If there's anything left after all the bills, after all the expenses, after all the necessities, then maybe we'll save or give. And this is exactly why most Americans are broke, stressed, and living in financial fear. The principle of first fruits isn't about religion. It's about psychology, priority, and the spiritual laws of prosperity that govern the universe. When you give first, you're making a declaration. I am not operating from scarcity. I am not controlled by fear. I trust that there will be enough. This single shift in behavior creates a cascade of positive changes in your financial life. First, it forces you to budget and live within your means because you can't give first unless you know what you have. Second, it breaks the addiction to consumption that keeps most Americans in debt because you're prioritizing meaning over materialism. Third, it activates what the Torah calls blessing. When you honor the system honors you. This isn't magical thinking. It's a documented pattern that wealthy, successful people throughout history have practiced. In practical terms, for Americans today, the first fruits principle means this: the moment you receive income, whether it's your paycheck, your business revenue, your freelance payment, whatever, the first 10–15% goes to something meaningful before you touch anything else. For some, that's charitable giving. For others, it's aggressive debt payoff or emergency fund building. The specific destination matters less than the principle. You pay first what matters most. When you reverse your financial priorities this way, something profound happens. The fear that comes from living paycheck to paycheck begins to dissolve because you're no longer at the mercy of circumstances. You've established order. You've created a system. And over time, you discover what the Torah has always taught. Those who honor the principle of first fruits never lack, because they've aligned themselves with the divine flow of abundance rather than fighting against it in a constant state of anxious scarcity. Perhaps the most countercultural financial principle in the Torah is the Sabbath, and when you understand its economic implications, it will completely revolutionize how you approach work, income, and financial security. Exodus 28 commands, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God." In America's hustle culture, where we glorify the grind, celebrate the side hustle, and wear exhaustion as a badge of honor, the idea of strategically not working seems financially irresponsible. We've convinced ourselves that more hours equals more money equals more security. But the Torah teaches the exact opposite. True prosperity comes from understanding when to stop, when to rest, and when to trust. The economic wisdom of the Sabbath is profound on multiple levels. First, it forces you to build systems that work without your constant intervention. If you can't stop working for 1 day a week, you don't have a business or a career. You have a trap. The wealthy understand this principle instinctively. They build assets, systems, and teams that generate income whether they're actively working or not. But most Americans are stuck in the labor for dollars trap, which means if they stop, the money stops, which creates perpetual fear and anxiety. The Sabbath principle teaches you to build differently, to think in terms of leverage and systems rather than just trading time for money. Second, the Sabbath is a weekly practice of trust, a declaration that your security doesn't come from your effort alone, but from your alignment with divine principles of prosperity. When you implement Sabbath economics in modern America, it looks like this: 1 day a week. It doesn't have to be Saturday or Sunday, but it must be consistent. You completely disconnect from income-producing activity. No checking work emails, no side hustle grinding, no financial stress. Instead, you focus on rest, reflection, relationships, and spiritual renewal. What happens during this practice is transformative. First, you gain clarity on your financial life that's impossible to see when you're constantly in motion. Second, you break the addiction to busyness that keeps most Americans perpetually exhausted yet perpetually broke. Third, you discover creative solutions to financial problems that only emerge when your mind has space to breathe. The Torah teaches that the Sabbath isn't a luxury for those who can afford it. It's a necessity for those who want to prosper. It's the rhythm of creation itself: work and rest, effort and trust, action and reception. When you align with this rhythm, you stop living in fear and start living in flow. The story of Joseph in Genesis 41 provides one of the most powerful financial management frameworks in all of Scripture, and it's directly applicable to Americans facing economic uncertainty today. When Pharaoh's dream revealed that 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of famine, Joseph didn't panic. He prepared. He instituted a systematic savings plan during the good years, storing up 20% of all produce, so that when the bad years came, there was provision not just for Egypt, but for the entire region. This is the Torah's model for financial wisdom: anticipate cycles, save during abundance, and create margin for uncertainty. Yet, most Americans do the exact opposite. They spend during abundance and panic during scarcity, which is why 78% of U.S. workers live paycheck to paycheck, regardless of income level. But there's a deeper principle in Joseph's story that we often miss: community accountability. Joseph didn't implement this plan as an individual. He did it as a leader serving an entire nation, with systems, structures, and accountability built in. The Torah teaches that financial wisdom isn't just personal, it's communal. In ancient Israel, every seventh year was a sabbatical year where debts were forgiven. Every 50th year was a jubilee where property was returned, and the community had built-in mechanisms to prevent generational poverty and extreme wealth concentration. These weren't just nice ideas. They were laws that created economic stability and reduced financial fear across the entire society. Today in America, we've lost this communal approach to finances, and instead we operate in isolation, hidden shame, and secret debt, which multiplies our anxiety and prevents us from accessing the wisdom and support we desperately need. The Joseph model for modern Americans means this. First, implement the 20% principle. No matter your income, commit to saving or investing 20% before you do anything else. This is first fruits applied to your future. This isn't easy, especially if you're currently in debt or living paycheck to paycheck, but the Torah principle is clear. Start where you are with what you have, even if it's 20% of a small amount. Second, find your community of accountability, whether that's a financial counselor, a trusted friend, a faith community, or a money management group, because trying to achieve financial wisdom in isolation is a recipe for failure. Third, shift from a scarcity mindset to a Joseph mindset. You're not just managing money for yourself. You're stewarding resources that could impact your family, your community, and future generations. When you adopt this broader perspective, the fear that comes from selfish anxiety, will I have enough, transforms into purposeful responsibility. How can I be a good steward? And that transformation is where true financial peace begins. So here's what we've discovered together in this journey through ancient wisdom. Your financial fear isn't fundamentally about the numbers in your bank account. It's about disconnection from timeless principles that govern prosperity, order, and peace. The Torah has given us a complete framework for moving from chaos to order, from slavery to freedom, from anxious scarcity to confident stewardship. We've seen that money represents much more than currency. It's a tool that reveals whether we're aligned with divine order or operating in chaos. We've learned that the Exodus story is your story, a blueprint for liberation from the slavery of debt and financial stress that has millions of Americans trapped. We've discovered the counterintuitive power of first fruits, of giving and prioritizing before consuming, which breaks the cycle of paycheck to paycheck living that no budgeting app can fix. We've explored the radical economics of the Sabbath, which teaches us that true prosperity comes not from endless hustling, but from strategic rest, trust, and building systems that work beyond our constant effort. And we've uncovered the Joseph model, which shows us that financial wisdom requires both personal discipline, the 20% principle, and communal accountability, shifting our focus from selfish anxiety to purposeful stewardship. These aren't religious concepts disconnected from modern reality. These are practical, proven principles that have sustained communities through every economic cycle, every crisis, every challenge for over 3,000 years. And they work just as powerfully today in 21st century America as they did in ancient Israel. The question now isn't whether these principles work. History has proven they do. The question is whether you'll apply them. Because here's the truth that the Torah makes abundantly clear. You cannot continue doing what you've always done and expect different results. If you're living in financial fear right now, if you're overwhelmed by debt, if you're stressed about money constantly, it's because you're operating according to broken principles that lead to chaos. The American culture of consumption, instant gratification, credit-fueled lifestyle, and hustle without wisdom has failed you. It's failed millions. But you don't have to stay there. You can make a different choice. You can begin today, literally right now, to implement even one of these Torah principles. And when you do, you'll start experiencing a shift. Not overnight, not magically, but genuinely and sustainably. Shalom, my friends. The path from fear to responsibility, from chaos to order, from financial slavery to financial freedom is ancient and well-worn. Countless people have walked it before you, guided by Torah wisdom that transcends culture, time, and circumstance. The journey requires courage, the courage to live differently than everyone around you, to prioritize differently, to think differently, to trust in principles that modern culture dismisses. But on the other side of that courage is something priceless: peace. Not the peace that comes from having millions in the bank, but the peace that comes from knowing you're aligned with eternal truth, operating according to divine order, and stewarding resources with wisdom and purpose. That's the peace the Torah promises, and it's available to you today. So take the first step, choose one principle from this video, and implement it this week. And watch as ancient wisdom begins to transform your modern financial reality. The journey from fear to responsibility begins now.